Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. If you are brand new here, hit that subscribe button. Hit the little bell icon on YouTube if you're there. Leave us a comment. Leave us a review. Share us with your friends in the industry. And head over to freight360.net. You can check out our whole searchable library of all of our content, and especially check out the Freight Broker Basics course to learn everything you need to know to get your brokerage off the ground and grow it successfully. Well, hey, man, let's just get right into sports here. See if I can get a little audio overclip here.
The Bills make me wanna shout, kick your heels up and shout, throw your hands up and shout, throw your head back and shout. Come on now.
All right, so you could hear that, right?
I can hear it.
All right, good deal. So the Buffalo Bills, my Bills. I was there at the Snow Fest on Sunday night. So clearly, the game was supposed to be on Saturday in Orchard Park, and we had a bunch of lake effect snow come through. It's still coming today, second storm, which is we're going to talk about how to deal with winter weather and all that in today's topic. But the game was awesome. It ended up being the end of the weekend. So Sunday night they were scheduled for, and it was a 31-17 Buffalo over Pittsburgh win. Ben, I will say I sat around a lot of Yinzers. A lot of terrible towels, a lot of Steelers jerseys, and they were just glad to be in the playoffs and loved the vibe. Like no one really expected a win, but they wanted to see a good game, and they got one. With TJ Watt not playing, it was kind of they're one of their star defensive players. It was going to be a tough battle.
So with TJ Watt, do you realize they are 1-10 when he doesn't start?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And that doesn't even include like games in the elements on the road. Like this just in general, like home games, everything. Right. So that says a lot. And you're on a third string quarterback, Mason Rudolph, but man, he put up some good yards. I think like 200 and
outside of that interception. I mean, I think it would have been a much closer game. Clearly, there was a 14-point swing with that interception into the end zone that Buffalo picked up pretty early.
For sure. I will say the Bills started off hot. That first half was 21-0 at one point, and then let the Steelers kind of hang out for a bit, and then they closed it out. Allen had 3 passing touchdowns, and then he ran one for 52 yards. But around like the NFL in general, I was surprised, man. Like Houston blew out Cleveland. KC embarrassed Miami, which I could have seen that coming in a cold game. Dallas, I don't know how. If you're a Dallas fan, I'm sorry. Like that was, I would be very upset if I had to watch that game to see a 7. I think Green Bay is a 7 seed. Yikes. So Dallas is out. Green Bay moves on. The Rams and the Detroit game was really cool. It ended up 24-23. I liked watching that one. Detroit pulled it away. Bills beat Pittsburgh, and then Tampa Bay upsetting a Philadelphia team that did not look like the first half of this season. It is again, if you're a Dallas fan or a Philly fan, I feel for you. I've gone through the drought. At least you guys are making the playoffs, but I've gone through that drought of just upsetting years over and over and over again. I will tell you, if anyone follows Trey Griggs and he's Beta Consulting and his show, he's got a podcast. Him and I will be having a bet for this weekend because it's the Bills hosting the Chiefs. We're all excited to have Taylor Swift come into Orchard Park.
They were talking about that on the radio this morning. They said apparently Taylor Swift didn't play Orchard Park, and they think there's some jinx. So that like it's, I don't know. I didn't understand the rationale.
Oh, like she didn't play a concert at the in Buffalo, which would have been at the Bills Stadium. Yeah,
right. She skipped that, and they were like, it'd be ironic if that jinxes Kelsey and the Chiefs to losing in Orchard Park. And someone's like, hey, maybe she'll do a pop-up show. I didn't really understand why that would have jinxed them, but they were talking about it on the Pittsburgh radio in the recap this week after.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Well, it's going to be a good one, man. This is like this is such a good rivalry, the Bills and the Chiefs. So the bet I have with Trey, whoever's team loses will have to go on the other's podcast and be wearing an opposing team's jersey and have temporary face tattoos of the other team all over their face. So you guys can expect Trey Greggs to be wearing a Josh Allen jersey and have a bunch of Bills logos on his face because it ain't going the other way. Either way, great matchup between these teams. Mahomes' first playoff game on the road ever.
Really?
First time playing in Buffalo
Oh.
with fans ever. Yeah. So the Bills play. Mahomes came to Buffalo in the COVID year, so there was no fans in the stands. So we didn't. The home field advantage didn't really exist the way that it is now with Bills Mafia being super loud. But every other game since then, regular season or postseason, has been at Arrowhead in Kansas City. So really excited. The Bills are favored by 2.5 points. I'm taking the Bills. I think we cover the spread. I think it's going to be a really awesome game. But it might come down to a field goal, a 3-point win. It could come down to, it could be a 6-point game, 5-point game. I don't know. Taking the Bills by 3 or more. And we'll see how the rest of the league pans out. But go Bills, man. I'm so excited. This is the best time of year. I'll be at the game, really pumped.
I'll be rooting for them the rest of the season.
Yeah. Congrats to Darcy. Was it Darcy won the? He won
Yes.
So we didn't have his name when we recorded last week, but yeah, Darcy, we know him pretty well. He won the Pick'em challenge that our producer Steven put together. So we'll have it out next year before the week 1 starts. So that way, I think we got in a little bit late this year. What do we got in the news? Anything? Winter weather's disrupting trucking, but we're going to talk about that as our topic today.
Yeah. Other than that, I mean, I haven't seen much of anything in the news, to be honest.
All right.
Bunch of political bullshit. That's about it.
So that's how primaries are starting up. So it's that time of year. Get yourself get yourself ready for a year full of getting in fights with family and friends and people on social media about politics. Or just stay out of it. You can do that too.
Exactly.
Go figure. All right. Cool. So we're going to talk a bit about weather and its impact. And we've done episodes like this in the past. This is extremely relevant, and we wanted to retouch it as well. Actually, really quick in the news, our producer Steven just reminded us about the Red Sea troubles. Yeah. Container ships in the Red Sea getting attacked. So there are big companies now diverting their movement out of the Red Sea. So that's the Suez Canal goes into the Red Sea, or vice versa. But yeah, people are going around Africa now, and they're rerouting. So it's going to cause delays and all kinds of issues in the supply chain. So if you work in the forwarding space or anything that's imported, expect to see challenges there. Thanks for that reminder. So winter weather. Okay. And we're going to touch on some other stuff too, whether it's wildfires or hurricane season or, mudslides, not picking on you, California, but you got some weird stuff that happens out there. Earthquakes, mudslides, wildfires, they get it all, and high taxes in California. And they have Glendale. So winter weather, so we're recording right now, Wednesday, January 17th. And the week that we are going through right now and the previous 7 days has been like a historically record low temperatures across the United States, unless you live in South Florida, in which case, Ben, maybe you had to wear socks today if it's, a little chilly, or maybe not.
I did. I actually bought a couple pair of long pants over Christmas, and it's the first time I've had to put them on.
Yes. So winter weather, I will start with this, right? This is something that is extremely predictable. Every single year, winter starts in December and ends in March. All right. And every single year, snow will fall somewhere in the United States. And every single year, you will have certain highways that have tractor trailer bans or empty trailer bans or accidents. All right. And what's awesome is we have these meteorologists in the National Weather Service who can predict when these storms are going to come through. They're not always accurate on the specifics of it and the amounts of snowfall or where exactly it's going to hit. But we generally know ahead of time when this stuff is going to happen. And there are plenty of things that you can do before a storm comes through. And communication is huge with your customers. And we'll get into some of that. And we'll kind of talk through the impact that a storm or a natural disaster has on the freight market before, during, and after. And we've done a short length video on this on YouTube as well. I highlighted some of the hurricanes that came through, I think, in 2022. So, but think about this: winter weather for, about half the United States every year, hurricane season on the East Coast, Florida, the Gulf, and apparently California. They got one of those this past season as well. Wildfires, had them out west mostly where it's dry, right? Like California, Colorado, some other places. Those are like your big
tornadoes. Well, here's the other thing too, right? Like what I've noticed is recently, like you're seeing lots more like horrific storms going up through the Midwest, like tornadoes through Tennessee, those
Yep.
areas. I mean, like I think last year I remember reading because, well, clearly, I mean, previously I would say where I lived was like the natural disaster kind of capital of the United States. Like you got a handful of hurricanes kind of either almost hit or one or two does hit, depending every year, like pretty much my whole life, except for the past few years. Like the last time I think, well, there was the big one, I think 2 or 3 years ago, but prior to that, like we haven't had many warnings or even really had to even bring in things from the outside because of warnings. I can't even remember. Like it's been a year or two. And what I was going to say though is what I do notice though was on the local weather, they talk about hurricane season, yada, yada, yada. But they had said, I think it was like July. It was somewhere in the mid part of this year. FEMA had exhausted, I think, almost their entire annual budget by like month 7 or 8 last year. And it was mostly due to what you were saying, wildfires in different areas, freeze overs in late winter last year, as well as, major storms coming through the Midwest. So the weather pattern, at the very least recently, shifted a lot and created lots of issues and opportunities all over the country, really all year. Where when FEMA used to be my customer when I worked at TQL. So like we would literally bank every year. We were waiting for the calendar to hit hurricane season because that's when you would make all of your money on that account. And honestly, since like the last major storm, like it's not really been the case. It's really more that this weather is hitting everywhere and anywhere, any month of the year. So, I mean, it's good news and bad news for a lot of different reasons that we'll dig into, in this show.
So I do have, I'm going to tie in a news headline. This comes from Produce Blue Book. So this is in our newsletter this week that came out Thursday. So if you get the newsletter, we'll have seen this. If you don't, subscribe to the newsletter on our website, freight360.net. I'll just read it off. So the United States is experiencing a severe cold snap with temperatures plummeting below freezing across much of the country. This extreme weather is impacting food habits with a shift from salads to soups as people stay indoors. The cold is also affecting the demand for fresh produce in northern cities. Additionally, winter storms are causing dangerous conditions for transporting fresh produce with heavy ice and whiteout conditions reported. So there's like it's like a trifecta there, right? The way in which people are consuming their food is changing, which affects certain commodities. The availability of that food is impacted, and then the transportation of that food is impacted. So to give you context, I'm in Buffalo. Right now, we have a travel ban in place in my town, Orchard Park, and we have had it since we had it last weekend, and they reinstated it again today. We're in the middle of a lake effect snowstorm, second one back to back within less than a week. Dropped over 4 feet in certain towns, and we've still got more coming. So when that happens and there's a travel ban, in addition to the travel ban, certain highways are shut down. So Route US 90, I-90, sometimes they'll do a ban of empty trailers because they're too light, they can blow over easily. Or they might have a ban of all tractor trailers because they want them off the road so the plows can clear them before they open the highway back up. US Route 219, which comes off of 90 and goes south into Pennsylvania, is also shut down right now. So think about that. If you have Buffalo outbound freight, or pick any city where this is happening, or inbound, massive disruptions right now in the supply chain.
So that specific one, have a customer that ships their steel I don't know if it's directly from Buffalo or through Buffalo. I know you got used to be a lot of steel manufacturing up there, but I'm pretty sure it's there. And I know tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes. There. And I was talking to them earlier today, and their manufacturing facilities are very concerned they might not be able to stay open because of the specific steel that they get from Buffalo. And if the storm, the way it's coming in, they were like, look, we can't get it out of Buffalo. And once we can't get it into where we need to because the storm is going to be shifting to where it's delivering to. And they're like, basically today, they're like, we might have like 7 or 10 days, depending on the weather, where we literally won't be able to get this. And if we can't, like, you're talking, just for listeners out there, like I've heard, and it's all different for different manufacturing facilities, but I've heard estimates that it's like literally upwards of almost like $1 million a minute for some of these manufacturing plants if they shut down, right? Just can't run. I mean, whether it's staff, turning it on, steel mills have huge costs if they can't keep these things running. So, I mean, these are not small things. It's not like, hey, I needed some inventory and we'll just wait a week to do this. You're talking about hundreds of people working assembly lines in manufacturing plants that if they don't have that material, nobody can go to work and they got to pay time of PTO. I don't even exactly know how all those costs play out, but I know it's a large number because we were talking to him this morning about this. So, I mean, this is not a small thing.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I mentioned a travel ban. So like workers can't legally go to work in a lot of places right now, at least in Western New York. So for example, I can't legally drive my car anywhere in Orchard Park today. If I tried to, I could get ticketed. I mean, they don't ticket everybody, but like the city of Buffalo, for example, over the weekend when they shut down right before the Bills game, gave out, it was like 160 tickets to people for violating the driving ban. The reason is they want to keep the roads clear so they can get the plows through so essential travel can make it, like, your
ambulance,
emergency response and all that stuff, right? And they said that was actually, they were thanking the population, like, oh, it's been worse in years past. We only had to give out 160 tickets this time, so thank you for following the rules. But either way, so these things cause issues, and we've said this before, that bad news gets worse with time. Okay, so if you know something is coming, whether it's a snowstorm or a hurricane, or tornadoes are harder because they just kind of happen. And they don't always have the warning. But if you know severe weather is coming through, that could spark up things like that. Have a conversation with your customers, with your carriers who might be already either booked on loads or regulars on certain lanes for you. Because if you can get ahead of this and figure out an alternative way to make this stuff happen and rearrange, different things, that's like, you're a true problem solver. That's a logistician. Yeah. You're literally doing the job that every freight broker should be aiming to do instead of just slinging trucks.
Here's the other thing too, right? And it relates to produce, but I'll tie it into the steel example too, right? So let's say when things do open up in the steel example out of Buffalo, right? When you haven't got what you need to run your company, right? As soon as they open, right? What do you think these companies are willing to pay to get team drivers to start running these loads, straight through, right? They're going to pay a lot of money to get the product in once things open up, right? Which creates opportunity and margin for us, right? Let's
talk about that, the before, during, and after.
Well, I wanted to go through the produce too, right? Because you saw these floods in California, right? Where like it was wiping out like large portions of crops. And if you think about it, right? If you go to any grocery store, there's some things that just are there all year round, right? No matter what the season is, you'll find apples, you'll find bananas, probably find pineapples. And again, you'll see different prices, especially with berries, but like any time of the year, like I drink blueberry smoothies with raspberries and some other vegetables, right? So like I can buy them any year. The price changes. What matters to a freight brokerage in this conversation is when supply drops, right, meaning there's not enough inventory to get it to everyone that should have it, right? Companies pay more. That's the obvious. But the other thing they do is they've got to pay to ship it faster often because there's not excess inventory that can sit on one side or the other, right? So again, when you see a supply of a commodity become in short supply, there's not enough of it to go where it normally does. Margins on shipments tend to go up, right? So when people always ask, what do you look for in research? These are the things that I see in news articles that jump out at me. Oh, there's a huge shortage in this commodity. Oh, they're not able to bring any as much as they need to from Mexico to make the shortfall. So prices are skyrocketing. Margins are going to go up on that commodity, right? That's something you can prospect. Those are some cues that you can pick up in just day-to-day news that will help lead your, search for where to go for which commodity and what to prospect.
Yeah, this is like exactly what happened with the COVID shutdowns. I mean, you had
everything though.
Exactly the same thing. That's just a much more exaggerated example of it.
Yep.
So I want to talk through like the life cycle of the disaster and how it impacts trucking, but us as freight brokers, right? So, and I use an example of hurricane season in a video that we did about a year ago. So we'll use that exact example. Okay. So but again, this applies to any short-term natural disaster, snowstorm, just severe weather, hurricane, you name it. Okay. We know it's coming. So what happens? Every driver wants to get the hell out of Dodge, right? So if a hurricane is aiming to hit just central
Miami,
Florida, right?
Miami,
okay. Miami,
Peninsula.
right?
Yep.
If they hit the peninsula, just about at least half, if not the entire peninsula, is going to have some sort of impact. But again, depends on the size of the storm and all of that. But every single truck wants to get the heck out of there. And in their case, they only have one direction to drive, and that's north, right? Up 95 or, it depends what side of the state they're on. Which means that they will either drive empty and just lose money, or they will drive at super cheap if they can get some kind of load northbound out of there. And, so we're going to see extremely, extremely low rates. Customers understand this, but if you think about it, if you have a new hire inside of your customer that it's their first year in hurricane season in Florida and they don't have last year's experience or previous years, maybe they don't know. These are conversations to have with them to help them look good and not drop the ball on their job, right? Don't be overpaying before a hurricane because we can get your stuff out of here for practically nothing. Because drivers just want to be able to get some kind of money to get out of there and get north. Right.
And it really does depend on the timing too, right? Just like anything else. Like I want everyone out there listening to this to think about it. If you were a truck driver and you're in Miami waiting for your load, right? And you see a storm likely to come through in an hour versus a day, right? You're going to gauge how quickly you can get out versus how much money you can. The more risk you take, the closer you wait to the storm, the more money you might make. If you get out as one of the last trucks, you might be able to get a good margin. If you leave when the storm is heading in, you're probably going to get the cheapest rates because everybody is leaving, right?
And we're not recommending you hang out and try to
correct, right? It's just to get the point across, right? To get everyone to kind of understand this is literally what happens. Like you see it, you don't want to get as a truck driver. Like, what are you going to do? The hotels fill up. There's only certain evacuation routes. Like, if you can't get out, you can't just sit in your truck and wait out a hurricane. And even if you can get into a hotel room, you don't want your truck outside during a hurricane. So like, I know that seems obvious, but literally the whole market leaves. So then what happens, right? Storm comes through and then?
So yeah, let's go during the middle of it. And I'm going to shift to like the snowstorm. Western New York is a better example here because Florida's, pretty much just nothing is going to be happening in Florida. Whereas Buffalo is a place that somebody might drive through that's being impacted in a local regionalized type of situation. So for example, if you're hauling a load from Boston to Chicago, you're going to take I-90 and go right through Buffalo, right? And if Buffalo's got severe weather or let alone the roads are shut down and you can't legally drive that way, they've got to reroute themselves. Maybe they're going to take 15 south and hit I-80 and go the southern route. Well, that's going to add extra mileage. It's going to add extra time.
Yeah.
And,
gas,
it's going to cause delays. I mean, you're going to have more congested traffic there because everybody's got to do that. So these things all come into play. So if there's delivery appointments on the other end of this, or it's got to be here at this time, otherwise something happens, you got a backwards plan. You might need to pick that up a day early or reschedule a delivery appointment. Think about these projects that, like, if the delivery gets there late, they didn't only not have their product. At some job sites, like, they paid to have people come in on, like, contractors to come in for an entire day. They've got crane rentals. They've got heavy construction equipment rented. Like, the puzzle pieces are all together. And if you drop the ball because you didn't do your part to, like, forecast this delay,
Yep.
you're definitely going to lose money, let alone possibly your customer, over those kind of situations. So those are like in the middle of it, that's the kind of stuff that'll happen. And then afterward, right? So we can go back to, your Florida hurricane example. So afterward, businesses open back up. And not only is there a crazy demand to get all this stuff shipped out that got held and delayed the last 3 to 5 days, now you might have FEMA trying to get in there, trying to get emergency supplies, generator sets, food, water, whatever that relief package looks like, it's getting there on a truck, just like anything else, right? So, though, FEMA doesn't have their own fleet of trucks, they have to rely on the open market when it comes to capacity. So now everybody is fighting for the same capacity to get down to Florida to do whatever it is that has got to be done then. So you're going to see a huge demand and a finite supply of capacity. So it's going to go at a premium to get everybody in there. So that's kind of like your before, during, and after. And the reason I wanted to walk through that is it might sound obvious to some people, but if you're newer in brokerage, like a lot of our listeners are, that's the stuff you have to think about. And those impacts happen every single season when it comes to certain regular produce seasons, right? It's not just a natural disaster. It's whenever there's a big change in
Market
supply or
shift.
demand, it's going to flip that market.
And that's the thing that I think also, like, gets overlooked a lot, right? So just think about this for a broker moving loads out of anywhere. Say you move, every Tuesday you move a load of widgets from Memphis to Charlotte. And every Tuesday the same truck picks up that load, right? How do you think that truck ended up in Memphis every week let's call it Wednesday, right? It's usually because on Monday they pick up a load wherever they live, call it Idaho, and they deliver on Wednesday to Memphis. And when you need your load picked up, they're there every Wednesday because they deliver that same load there every Wednesday. And that's why you have your rate. That's where your truck comes from. So your truck is really dependent not only on what happened that day, but what happened before it, right? So as you pointed out, when the market reshuffles the deck and everything stops, all the trucks that normally would have been there, say the market in Miami opens on Thursday, the hurricane comes through Tuesday, market opens up Thursday, and you can start booking trucks. Every truck that would normally be there on Thursday probably isn't there because they didn't run the load they did before that. So what happens is everybody is using a different truck and accessing the spot market as opposed to who they normally use. And that creates lots of opportunities for everybody because everybody's scrambling with the same resources to get all their loads picked up at the same time. And again, this is really where the brokers that plan ahead and understand this can help understand and set the right expectations with their customers. Hey, how are you guys shaping up for this? How are you planning? What are you expecting on the other end of this? How many loads do you need to get out? How many loads will you need to get out on the other side of the storm? Have you prepped? Have you talked to any of your carriers? What might you need from us, right? Asking these questions is going to go a long way to helping solve this ahead of time as best you can. But two, it's differentiating you from every other broker they work with that didn't think to ask this question, right? And as they're talking to you, they're thinking, well, these guys I've been working with for years didn't ask me this. Why is Nate all of a sudden asking me? Now your trust builds and they start to want to utilize you more. This is your competitive advantage. It's usually really just questions and curiosity and trying to think about what's likely to happen and asking questions around it, right? You don't need to be super complicated about it. It's like, keep it simple. Hey, curious what your plan is? I see this is coming up. Because it's not really just these drastic things, right? I'll give you another example of where this happens a lot, and it's happening right now, is when you see temperatures like you see right now. Like I used to do a ton of work in Chicago every day. And you know what happens when you see negative 10 degrees for multiple days on end? Most of the trucks don't start. So even a truck that has the driver and they can get to work they can't get their truck started in time. So maybe it's taking them 2-3 hours to get some of them warm. Maybe they've got somebody that can keep them running if they've got that type of staff. But a lot of trucks, like literally, can't be driven because diesel starts up differently in cold weather than, a regular engine. So like there's lots of lost capacity in every one of these examples that creates opportunities for the prospect you're talking to or the customer you have, right? It's not just the blizzards, the 6 feet of snow, and the hurricanes. It's also 2 days of below zero weather, or, the freeze over they had in Texas a year or two ago, right? Like these cause massive disruptions in the entire country's supply chain due to temperature change, not just hurricanes, winds, and snow.
So I had to look this up while you were saying that. So Ken Adamo had a really, really good post today about the cold weather, not about a diesel engine starting up, but driver preference even. So like there are certain drivers that are like, I ain't going north of the Mason-Dixon line in the wintertime, you know what I mean? Or
they don't.
Maybe that's not where they draw the line, but it could be like, dude, I do not want to be up in Chicago when it's 0 degrees, right? So he had a cool map. He showed a snapshot from 2021 and again from I think like current. Yeah. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce or lumber. Their online databases contain thousands of companies throughout the produce and lumber industry supply chains. You can easily search their databases to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com or lumberbluebook.com and click join today. Today, or the 17th, so that's today as we record, and it shows like Chicago outbound for the last 7 days, which is like basically when this cold front has come through, and it's pretty cheap to get yourself to Southern California or South Florida right now. But if you're going to be, you got to pay drivers like way more if they're going to be going to the Northeast or staying in that Midwest region, like your rate per mile, because drivers are like, I'll take a lesser rate to get down where it's warm because I don't want to deal with the cold, the snow, the delays, the breakdowns, the maintenance. I just don't want to deal with it. And they make that decision. And it's, some of it's a business choice, but other it just is personal preference. And the same thing, the map he had from 2021, I'll give you some actual numbers, right? So like Chicago outbound, and this is in the wintertime. This is from a few years ago. If you wanted to go Chicago to Detroit, you're at over $3 a mile. If you want to go to Arizona, you're at under $2 a mile. If you want to go to Texas, you are at just over $2 a mile. Right? And that same concept applies in this current past trailing week, where if you've got Chicago down to the south, like Texas, $1.70. Whereas if you're going to be in like close to Buffalo, you're at almost $3. Detroit, $3 because it's cold and there's bad weather and nobody wants to be up here. And again, it's going to also factor in other things like the your load to truck ratio in those regions. But weather's a big impact there, right? Because if a driver doesn't want to be operating where it's cold, that's going to impact your available truck, part of your load to truck ratio. So those are also great questions to ask drivers. Like, is there a certain time of year? Like, is there places that you just don't want to go to? Like, some will tell you, I don't ever want to go to a Walmart distribution center. Some might tell you regions, like, I don't ever want to go to California. Or I don't want to operate north of the Mason-Dixon line in the wintertime because I don't want to deal with cold weather and the maintenance that goes along with, I don't put chains on my tires and deal with getting stuck on the side of the highway because a bunch of snow dumped on us. So stuff to think about there. We actually had I've had this happen twice now in the past 10 years with winter cold, like extreme cold. So like moving potatoes out of like the Idaho area where it's like negative 10 degrees. And this is now, no joke, this is the kind of stuff that I've dealt with carriers. When they are told they need a reefer because it's got to be able to keep the temperature at a certain level, because reefers don't just cool, they also warm. Seriously, no joke. Second time now, they put a propane heater in the back of a dry van. And they're like, oh, yeah, it'll keep it warm. And what happened? The onions showed up frozen. Like idiots. Like who the BOL legally says reefer, and the temperature it's got to be running like continuous at, and the shipper and the carrier both are like, yeah, just put a propane heater in there, it's all good. No, and the claim this happened like 2015, I think, at another company I was with, and again now this year. So
Insulation has value. Like there's a reason you need something to be able to keep temperature out and a different temperature in. It's not just the heat on one side or the other, right? It'd be like going out. To me, it'd be like literally going out in 30-degree weather with a space heater and no coat and wondering why you can't stay warm, right? Like there's nothing keeping the heat in.
Exactly. But the other thing too, like
80-mile-an-hour winds blowing past the side of your trailer with 0-degree wind, like the outside of that trailer is going to be frozen solid and every potato near it.
Yes. So also think about this, right? So any kind of reefer load, if you're dealing with extreme cold weather or extreme hot weather in the summertime, they're going to go through more fuel in that reefer unit on the front of their trailer to maintain a extremely different temperature than what's outside. And the pre-cooling takes a lot longer too. So these are just planning considerations when you're dealing with extreme cold or extreme hot weather too in the South in the summertime. So the whole takeaway here is like, we know this stuff happens every single year, and it's about how you plan for it and how you clearly communicate. Sometimes you've got to double and triple check, to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as what the expectations are, what the settings are, and delivery times, all that stuff. So,
okay. So let's transition a little bit to how can you make money using this concept? How do you get more business and more customers doing this?
Well, I think I'll give you my answer, then you could add on. So I think in how do you make more money or capitalize on any situation is to be the guy that goes like the extra mile. So we talk about all the time, you want to be an extension of your customer's supply chain. You don't just want to be a transactional freight broker that's just, hey, what loads do you have available today? And it's just a very narrow window. You want to be big picture, right? So if you can go, like I always say, understand what's going to make your customer, think about them, put yourself in their shoes. What's going to make them look good and what's going to make them look bad or possibly lose their job, get fired, right? And if I can figure out how to mitigate the things that make them look bad and how to increase the amount of things that make him look or her look good, that's what I want to do. And so my answer would be, if you've got somebody who's newer, you want to make sure you're holding their hand through this entire process and sharing every bit of knowledge that you have on upcoming weather and things like that. And then forecasting into, what's going to happen after the storm when your production starts back up, when you guys start to ship all of your outbound goods again. We can expect rates to be extremely high. So why don't we try and lock down some trucks ahead of time who are looking to get back to wherever this location is, because they want to ship from here to here to set them back up for their next load. So, that's what I would do, is just try to plan ahead here, and just always remember that your customer, they've got a boss too. They've got someone who's going to be reviewing them on how well they get their trucks in and out. They don't care if it's through a broker or an asset-based carrier. They just care that our stuff got moved and our customers got it. So that would be my answer to it. What's your take? I have a feeling you're going to go a little bit different direction.
That's really good. I was really just going on the prospecting side. Like when I see these coming through, like that's where I prospect. So if I see like Chicago freezing over, like, and maybe it's like a whole state, I'm probably going to pick the area with the most prospects to start, right? And I'm going to call them ahead of the storm. And then I'm basically, my lead in is just going to be like, hey, was giving you a buzz because I work with a few other carriers and your customers in your area. A huge storm's coming through, and I'm helping them line up some early options to avoid as much headache as they can. Just reaching out to see if you guys are prepped and if you're all covered up for the storm, right? Like that alone is enough to open up most conversations for the same reasons we just talked about. Most of their other brokers aren't having this conversation, right? Your average broker that they're working with is just going to deal with the problems once they hit them in the face, right? So prospecting ahead of time and not only being proactive to call them is important, but name drop if you've got a customer there. And even if you don't, insinuate that you're calling them because you've got other customers in the area and you're helping them plan for this. And you want to make sure that they didn't need anything while you're already getting trucks lined up for the area, right?
So isn't that called like the ambulance chase, right?
Yes. Ambulance chasing, right? Go to where the problems are. That's where you're likely to find opportunities, right? back in the, 30 and 40 years ago, when an ambulance was driving to the hospital from an accident, attorneys would literally follow the ambulance to the hospital, go into the hospital, and then ask the patient once they woke up, hey, do you want to sue the person that hit you? Because clearly somebody was hurt. Clearly there's a potential for a lawsuit. Go where that potential is, right? Don't prospect anywhere randomly. Pick the most likely place where people are going to have an issue that you can solve, right? And storms are just really great ways to do that because they already work regionally.
Yeah. So I guess the good thing is like ambulance chasing, where it comes from with the attorneys going after, they saw an accident, ambulance goes to the hospital, they want to go be like, hey, I'll represent you and we'll go sue the person in charge. Gets negative connotation. I'm pretty sure it's illegal too. But in freight, so we use that phrase to like relate to it. But here's the deal. Like we're realistically, we're trying to help out these prospects because they have issues. Remember, if I'm a traffic manager and a storm clears through and I can't get a single truck into my location, but our competitor across the street is getting all the trucks because they got better relationships with carriers and brokers, I look bad. It's my job to make sure that I've got a bullpen, a Rolodex of these transportation providers, right? So you're absolutely right. It's not a bad thing. It's just a huge opportunity. And, I love your answer. I think that's a great way to capitalize on it.
I'll say that.
Don't be greedy either.
I'll say that. I'm like, listen, my job is to cover your ass. My job as a broker is to make you look good, right? Like I say that constantly to prospects and customers because it's true, right? Like if I do my job well, you should look twice as good at your job to your boss. And he should have no idea that I'm the reason that you look as good as you do compared to when you weren't using me. Like that's really the value I'm adding, right? Just making that person objectively perform better on time percentage, less issues. Like Steven had a really good example. Steven, you want to unmute and walk through the one you just threw in there? Because I think it's a pretty good one.
Yeah. So mine was more of a long play, but it kind of ties into the whole thing. So I had a customer of mine that has product they import that's got a 1-year shelf life, and they would ship it out of the Northeast to locations in the Midwest and the Southeast. And one of the issues they'd run into as produce season moves up the coast, rates would get higher near the end of the year, and they couldn't account for that, and they were running into additional charges. So in a conversation that we had, I told them, well, let's move some of that product since you have a year to the Southeast, and when rates get higher up there, just ship it out of the Southeast. You'll save some money, and you can balance your books a little better. And the unforeseen result was that as they approach new customers in that area, they were able to get that product to them
better service,
cheaper and faster.
Quicker.
And then because I helped them set that up, I got the freight. So it worked for everybody, and they were able to grow their business, and I grew with them. So
that's awesome. And I think I might have told this story before too, but that's something that we're setting up this year as well with Pierce, very likely, is warehousing space in Florida. Because literally we use the example of Florida with produce season a lot, right? The outbound to get a truck to go into Florida when there's nothing to come outbound is you're going to pay through the roof, and it's the opposite when the market's the other way. But by having warehousing space set up in one of our facilities in Florida and to move that product that has an available shelf life of a certain amount of time to get it down there when it's cheap, that way you're not overpaying to get it shipped down there, is going to save a ton of money. So like, for example, stuff that's trying to go to Fort Pierce or Palm Beach or anywhere on like the Space Coast, is that what they call it? Or the Treasure Coast, whatever, from Central Florida. Now I can get a regional driver that's just got to drive, 90 minutes for a delivery, and they're going to be back the same day, versus trying to send somebody from Rochester, New York, all the way down to Florida, and I'm going to be paying through the roof for it. So yeah, I mean, look at that. All three of us getting good ideas on how to capitalize on this stuff. Here's the hard part. Go do it. Right? It's like all this stuff that we teach you guys, the concepts are so basic and so simple, but the amount of people that actually apply all of this and succeed is very, very minimal. It's like any person that reads a book to improve themselves or watches a self-help video or podcast like ours, right? Be the person that actually applies this stuff and go be a difference maker for your company or your brokerage, right? Because everybody else, the vast majority, won't do it. So you got to be, I always say, like, be the the upper 50 percentile of brokers that go the extra mile, because we have so many in our industry that don't. They're either too inexperienced, or they don't have the drive or the hustle, or they just don't think that way. They're not wired that way. So go be the one that goes a little bit further, and you're going to stick out to your prospects and your customers. Good conversation, though. This is good. You got anything else on the winter weather? I feel like there was a really good discussion on. We tied in produce season and year-round rates fluctuating and the bills. We got it all on this episode.
Yeah, that's pretty comprehensive. I mean, we didn't talk much about wildfires, but the same premise really holds with everything else we were talking about.
Wildfires is that that's almost more like your COVID scenario, where it's a much more elongated time frame. Like a snowstorm might be for 24 hours. It could be for a few days. A hurricane is over within a couple of days, but a wildfire could impact an area for months. You know what I mean? And we don't know how the wind's going to shift and where it's going to move to. So wildfires are very unpredictable like that. So yeah, same thing with tornadoes don't really have much warning, but the same thing will apply afterwards. So we'll hit tornadoes or wildfires or anything else, all encompassing to wrap it up. But even if it we couldn't project it and it didn't disrupt shipping before, it's going to have impacts on damaged buildings in the area. You might have plants that are shut down, and now you're going to have opportunities for influx of freight coming out of other locations, FEMA coming in, all that stuff. There's tons of opportunity. And again, we're not trying to be cynical here, but this is the reality. This stuff happens in our industry.
When bad shit happens, people need help. That's what we do. It's not cynical. Yes. I mean, it's literally what we do. So, I mean,
for sure.
Go where the need is.
Good stuff. Make sure to tune in on Tuesday for the final mile. Oh, I did want to say this. Somebody asked in the YouTube comments, and I replied to it. They said they were watching our final mile, which is our Q&A that comes out Tuesdays. We record it the week before it releases.
They were complaining about no sports
talk. Big win, Bills playing Steelers. And I was like, oh, yeah, we didn't know yet because we recorded early. So if you guys ever wonder why we don't talk sports or anything news on the final mile, it's because we record it the week before. Literally right after this, we record it. It would be way too long of an episode to have them both. And we like to break it up into bite-sized pieces for you guys. So check out the final mile for some good questions on Tuesday. And then next Friday, you'll get my reaction on the Bills-Chiefs game. Ben, any final thoughts?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, the big divisional game in Orchard Park, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.